I didn't plan to hike alone that morning. It just worked out that way. My husband and I had been camping near Sabino Canyon, not too far from Tucson. We were in the middle of a rough patch. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of frustration that builds up over years of being around each other too much. Little things turn into bigger things. Words feel sharper than they should. You start holding on to silence like it's a shield. It was mid-March, not too hot, not too cold. Clear skies. We'd been in Arizona for a few days already. Our plan was to work our way down through some of the national forest land and eventually meet friends farther south. But that morning, I just didn't want to sit in camp anymore, listening to the fire crackle and pretending everything was fine. He didn't ask where I was going. I didn't tell him. I just grabbed my water bottle, threw on a hat, and started walking down the nearby trail. The canyon is beautiful in its own way. It's not lush or green like other parts of the country, but it's raw and dry and alive. Tall saguaro cacti stand like sentinels along the ridges. Sharp little lizards skitter across the dirt before your boot hits the ground. Everything is prickly, hardened, built to survive sun and wind and long, hot silence. The trail started flat but slowly began to rise. The higher I got, the more I could see. Layers of hills and rock, pale tan and faded orange, leading out toward Tucson in the distance. The city shimmered a little in the morning heat, even though it was still early. I wasn't really paying attention to the map or the markers. I just walked. It felt good to move without purpose. The crunch of gravel underfoot was the only sound, besides the occasional rustle of a bird in the brush or a far-off gust of wind that swept sand along the path. After about an hour, I reached a bend in the trail where it dropped slightly into a narrow wash. There were fewer plants here, just scattered creosote and mesquite, and long patches of bare earth that had been carved out by rain long ago. The walls of the canyon rose on either side, felt more closed in than before. Still no people. I hadn't passed a single soul since I left camp. As I rounded a corner, I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A shape, a figure, not quite moving, just standing on the path, a good 200 feet away. The light was bright, but the figure was in shade. I narrowed my eyes, took a few more steps forward. It was a man, and he was completely naked. He wasn't doing anything, not really, just standing there, facing my direction, but not walking. His arms hung loose at his sides, and he had long, sun-darkened limbs.
Nos chus.
His feet were planted on the hard-packed ground like roots. His shoulders were wide, and his hair was short and gray. I stopped walking. My body went tight instantly, not in fear exactly, but something close, more like confusion and instinct all mixed together. That kind of tension that makes you feel your own heartbeat in your neck. There was nothing around us, just rocks, air, and silence. I didn't move, neither did he. I considered turning around and heading back, but something kept me still. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that weird human trait of wanting to understand what you're looking at before you act. I blinked hard and stepped off the trail, behind a creosote bush, just far enough to crouch without being totally exposed. I watched him for a long time. He didn't react, didn't shift, didn't seem to notice or care that I was there. He eventually turned, slow and stiff, and began walking the trail again, away from me now, heading in the same direction I had been walking. His gait was heavy, like each step took effort. He didn't look back once. It took a long time for him to disappear around the next bend. My mind was spinning. I tried to make sense of it. Was he homeless? Lost? High? Was this some kind of weird desert ritual? Or maybe I thought maybe he was from one of those nudist places. I'd heard about them. Little communities out in the desert where people live clothing-free, off-grid, half forgotten by the world. I didn't know there was one nearby, but who knows what's tucked into the folds of Arizona canyons. Still, there was something off. He didn't look free or relaxed or joyful like you'd expect from someone embracing a clothing-free lifestyle. He looked angry, or maybe just worn down, like the sun had baked something into him that couldn't be undone. I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees, decided to keep going, but slower now, more cautious. I stayed off the center of the path, near the rocks and brush, watching every curve in the trail as I climbed. I didn't want to see him again, but I also didn't want to go back the way I came. Not yet. About half a mile up, I found a small overlook, a spot where the trail widened and overlooked a lower shelf of land. I could see clear down to the wash from here. The trail I just walked stretched like a thin thread below, and down there, barely visible, was the man. He had stopped again. He stood with his back to the canyon wall, completely still, arms at his sides, just staring into space. Then something happened that made me grip my water bottle so tight I thought it might crack. Another man stepped into view, also naked. This one was shorter, thinner. Bite. He walked up to the first man, slow, deliberate. They didn't touch. They didn't speak, at least not that I could see. They just stood there, not moving, both facing the trail. Then, as if they'd rehearsed it, they turned together and walked off the trail, disappearing into a crack in the canyon wall. Some kind of path or crevice I hadn't noticed before. It swallowed them in shadow. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. This wasn't just some random nudist guy. There were more of them, and they weren't just hiking. There was something organized about it, like a pattern, a ritual, a routine. And then a darker thought hit me. What if I'd kept walking? What if I hadn't stopped? I turned back. I didn't care how far I had come. My legs were shaky but steady enough to carry me fast. I didn't run, not yet, but I walked with a speed that bordered on panic. I didn't stop to check behind me. I didn't look at the wash or the ridge. I didn't even take a drink. It took almost an hour to get back to camp. My husband was still sitting there by the fire pit, poking the coals with a stick. He didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't tell him, but I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound outside the tent felt sharper. Every snapping twig could have been bare feet. I kept thinking of that narrow trail and those two figures walking into the shadows like it was just another Tuesday. The next morning, I checked a map, and there it was, not far from where I had turned around. A private, off-grid resort, tucked into the hills near Sabino Canyon. A nudist community, not marked with any big signs. No arrows or trails leading to it. Just a vague description and a P.O. box in Tucson. I looked it up again after we got home. The place existed, all right. It had been there since the 70s. Small, isolated, no website, just a phone number and a few vague online mentions from people who'd been there once. One review said, "You won't find friendlier folks anywhere." I never went back. That was years ago, but I still think about it sometimes. Not because I'm afraid of nudists. I'm not. I've got no problem with how people want to live, as long as they're not hurting anyone. But it wasn't the nudity that scared me. It was the way they moved, the silence, the way they watched the trail like they were waiting for someone, or something. Sometimes I wonder how many other hikers have passed through there. How many people kept walking, thinking they were alone, only to find themselves part of something they didn't understand. And how many never came back. I booked the cabin to get away from everything. The listing said no signal, no neighbors, just you and the mountains. That's exactly what I needed. Life in the city had started pressing down on me. Noise, work stress, too many people, too many voices. I wanted something quiet, just trees, cold air, and silence. I found it on a rental site that specialized in remote, off-grid stays. It looked like someone had converted an old hunting shack into a livable space. Small, single room with a kitchen nook, a bed, a bathroom with well water and a compost toilet, and a propane heater for warmth. They had a little write-up about the history, built in the 60s by someone's grandfather, now used for weekend getaways. It was in the mountains, about 4 hours from the city. The last part of the drive was 10 miles of dirt road. No cell service past the first ridge. I arrived around 3 p.m. on Friday, just as the shadows were starting to stretch across the gravel pull-off beside the cabin. It was exactly what I wanted. Cold, quiet, and far away from anything. I unloaded the cooler from the back of my car, carried in my duffel bag, and did a quick walkthrough of the cabin. It smelled like old wood and cold air, but it wasn't bad. I checked the cabinets. There were some dusty cans of soup, a roll of paper towels, matches, Everything looked just like the pictures. There was a narrow trapdoor in the floor near the kitchen wall. It was latched shut. I figured it was the crawl space, maybe for pipes or storage. By sunset, I had a fire going in the small cast iron stove. I made eggs and toast on the gas burner, then sat in the wooden chair by the window and read for a while. I couldn't see any other lights through the trees. No headlights, no houses, nothing. Just darkness and woods. That first night was peaceful. Cold air against the windows, the wind pushing through the trees. I slept straight through until morning. The second day, Saturday, was uneventful. I hiked a little, followed an old trail uphill, found a frozen stream. I didn't see a single person the whole time. When I got back, I warmed up some soup, boiled water for coffee, and watched the snow drift lazily down. It didn't stick, but it coated the porch for a little while. That night, though, something strange happened. I had made pasta around 7 p.m., ate it by the window, watching the sky darken. Then I packed the leftovers into a plastic container and stuck it in the little fridge. It was propane-powered, like everything else, and made a faint clicking sound when it cycled on. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. But when I woke up Sunday morning and went to grab breakfast, I found the fridge door open. The leftover pasta was gone. Not just missing, gone, container and all. I stood there, staring at the empty shelf. I checked the counter, checked the trash bin under the sink. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe I had put it somewhere else and forgotten. But I didn't drink or take anything that would mess with my head. And I knew for a fact I'd put it in that fridge. The door wasn't just cracked open, either. It was wide open, like someone had pulled it open carelessly and left it. I checked the windows, all latched. The front door was locked, same as I'd left it. No broken glass, no scuff marks, no animal tracks in the thin dusting of snow outside. I figured maybe it was my fault. Maybe I hadn't shut the fridge door all the way, and some animal got in through a crack somewhere. A raccoon, maybe, or a rat. I spent the rest of Sunday a little uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. Read more, hiked a bit, but I didn't have much of an appetite that night. I boiled some water and had instant noodles, ate fast, locked up tight, and went to bed early. I woke up at 2:23 a.m. I don't know what made me open my eyes. There wasn't a sound, not even the wind. It was so quiet it almost hurt. I sat up, listening. The fire had gone out in the stove, and the air was cold. I stayed still, ears straining. I didn't hear anything at first, just my own breath, the faint tick of the heater. Then I heard a creak, a long, low sound, like a floorboard slowly shifting under weight, came from near the kitchen. I froze. I was sure I had locked the door. I was sure the windows were shut. I didn't move, just waited. Another sound, not loud, just a faint thud, like something soft tapping against the floor. I reached for the flashlight beside the bed and turned it on quickly. The room was empty. I got up, slowly, and swept the light across the kitchen. The fridge door was closed. The counters were clean. The front door was still locked. I checked the latch on the trapdoor. It was shut, but something felt wrong. That quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt tight, like something was holding its breath. I went back to bed, flashlight beside me, and didn't fall asleep for a long time. Sunday morning, I found more food missing. A whole sleeve of crackers, 2 protein bars, a bag of jerky, all gone. No trash, no crumbs, no wrappers. I checked everything. Windows, door, under the bed, under the couch. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. I was no longer convinced this was an animal. I didn't want to panic, but I needed to know what was happening. I had a small wildlife cam in my car, a motion-activated thing I use sometimes when camping. I'd planned to set it up outside to see if I could catch deer or anything near the cabin. Instead, I set it up inside. I hid it between 2 books on the shelf facing the kitchen, angled slightly toward the fridge and the center of the room. I set it to record automatically if it picked up movement between midnight and 5 a.m. I stayed up as long as I could Sunday night, flashlight in hand, all the lights on. I finally passed out close to 1 a.m., wrapped in my sleeping bag with a knife under the pillow. I woke up Monday morning to silence again. Cold air, weak sunlight through the windows. I got up immediately and went to check the cam. It had triggered several times. I pulled the memory card, popped it into my phone, and started scrolling through the short clips. The first few were nothing, just me walking around Sunday night, adjusting the lights. Then I found the one that stopped my heart. 2:41 a.m. Sunday night. The video started in silence. The room was dark, grainy, lit only by the faint glow of the heater. Then the trapdoor in the kitchen slowly creaked open. I saw fingers first, slow, pale fingers pushing up the wooden hatch from beneath. Then a hand. Then a man's head. He was thin, balding, dressed in a dirty thermal shirt and loose pants. He moved like he was used to it, quiet, practiced. He lifted himself out of the floor, stepped into the kitchen, and stood completely still, just watching. Then he walked over to the fridge, opened it, pulled out a sandwich I'd made the night before, and ate it right there. Slowly, calmly, he looked around the room. His eyes passed over the camera, but he didn't seem to notice it. He walked to the bed, my bed, and just stood there watching me sleep. He stayed for almost 10 minutes. Then he turned around, walked back to the trapdoor, climbed down, and pulled it shut over him. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands shaking. I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to breathe. But I forced myself to walk to the trapdoor and stand over it. It looked the same, closed, latched. I didn't touch it. I grabbed my stuff, shoved it into my bag, and walked out the door. Left the rest of my food, the books, everything. I drove. I didn't care about the speed limit. I didn't stop until I hit paved roads and my phone got service again. I pulled over and called the local sheriff's department. They sent someone out. I gave them the footage, told them everything. They took it seriously. 2 deputies met me back at the cabin an hour later. I waited in the car while they went inside. When they came out, one of them looked sick. They'd opened the trapdoor. There was a man living under the floor. He had a sleeping bag, a backpack, water bottles, and a pile of food wrappers that had clearly been building up for days. There was even a small flashlight and a knife. He wasn't there when they went in, but they found a back tunnel that led under the cabin and out to the tree line. He dug it himself, probably over years. They followed it for 50 feet before losing the trail. They think he'd been living there on and off for a long time. Maybe he used the cabin in the off-season. Maybe he'd lived in the woods for years. Maybe he was homeless. Or maybe he just wanted to be near people without them knowing. They put out alerts, search notices, even brought in dogs. They never found him. I don't camp alone anymore, and I'll never stay in a cabin I didn't build myself. Every time I hear the house creak at night, I think about that video. His face rising up from the floor, looking straight at me while I slept. His footsteps so quiet I never heard a thing. Some part of me still wonders if I locked the trapdoor tight enough before I left. I wonder if someone else has booked that same cabin since then. If they've noticed their food missing. If they've heard footsteps. If they're being watched. I booked the cabin because we needed something cheap. My girlfriend and I had been arguing a lot. City life, bills, long work weeks, and barely enough time for each other. It all added up. So when I saw a listing for a small off-grid cabin about 2 hours north, I grabbed it. It was dirt cheap. No Wi-Fi, no electricity, just propane, solar lights, and a wood stove. The photos showed trees, a lake in the distance, and a small shed beside the cabin. The listing mentioned it wasn't used much, but it was clean and stocked with basics, water jugs, a gas stove, and some emergency supplies. It sounded perfect. Somewhere to unplug, sit by the fire, and remember what quiet sounded like. We packed simple, sleeping bags, books, canned food, some wine, flashlights, and a solar charger. I printed the directions because the host said GPS often cut out past the second dirt road. We left Friday afternoon and made it to the last turnoff around 5. From there, the road turned rough. Deep ruts, bare patches of rock, trees leaning close. The car rocked and bounced. My girlfriend was gripping the door by the time we pulled up. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. It looked exactly like the pictures. Plain wood, a small front porch, and a slanted roof. The shed was off to the right, just a few steps from the trees. It was older, darker, with a rusty padlock dangling open from the door. I assumed the owner must have left it that way. Maybe they stored firewood or tools in there. Inside, the cabin was simple but neat. A wood table, 2 chairs, a propane stove, and a metal-framed bed with a firm mattress. Shelves with candles and food staples. A few tools hung near the door: an axe, a hammer, a first aid kit. It smelled like pine and dust. We unpacked, opened the windows to air it out, and settled in. By sundown, I had a fire going in the stove. We sat close, ate soup, and drank half a bottle of wine in silence. The cold air outside pressed against the windows, but inside, the fire crackled and popped. That night, I slept hard. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. There was a sound outside, a steady, crunching rustle, like someone stepping on dry leaves and pine needles just beyond the porch. It wasn't fast, not animal-like. Slow, careful steps. I sat up in the dark and listened. The sound moved around the side of the cabin, toward the back. I felt my girlfriend shift beside me. I didn't want to wake her. I got up quietly, slipped on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and moved to the window. The wind had picked up slightly. Tree branches swayed and scraped against each other. I scanned the yard with the light. The shed door was wide open. I remembered it had been shut earlier. I considered going out but stopped myself. It wasn't worth it. Probably just the wind, I told myself. The cabin didn't have exterior locks beyond a simple hook latch. Still, it felt solid enough. I bolted the door, shut the windows, and went back to bed. In the morning, I forgot all about it. We made coffee on the propane burner, ate granola bars, and sat on the porch with blankets draped over our shoulders. The air was cold but clean. My girlfriend looked more relaxed than she had in weeks. I felt good too. We talked about going for a hike later or maybe just reading all day. I mentioned hearing something the night before and how the shed door was open. She just shrugged and said, "Probably the wind." Around noon, we noticed the back door wouldn't latch. It was one of those basic wood doors with a push-button lock. But when I turned the handle, it clicked loose without resistance. I leaned down and noticed the strike plate on the frame had been cracked, and the wood around it was splintered, like someone had forced the lock with a crowbar or something thick. That's when I started getting a bad feeling. I didn't tell her at first. I just said the door was a little loose and we should keep it blocked with the table at night. We spent the rest of the day playing cards and reading, but I kept thinking about that door, the shed, the slow footsteps. Something wasn't right. I checked the shed again in the afternoon. The door was still open. I walked inside. There were empty hooks on the walls, an old workbench covered in dust, a metal jug with motor oil, a few rusty nails, and a rope hanging from a beam. But the floor had mud, not the kind that blows in with the wind. Boot prints, several of them. They looked fresh, a size 10 or 11 maybe. The prints were smeared, like someone had stepped through half-dry mud and paced around inside. I backed out, closed the door slowly, and looped the lock back through. I didn't have a key for it, so I just tucked it in so it looked locked. I didn't want to scare her yet. We went to bed early that night. I blocked the back door with the table, then put the axe beside the bed, just in case. I woke up again around 3 a.m. This time, the smell hit me first. Something was burning. Not smoke, more like cooked food, fat and spices. It smelled like meat frying in a pan. The cabin was dark and still. My girlfriend was asleep beside me. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped quietly into the kitchen area. The burner was on. There was a pot on the stove. Steam was rising from it. Inside, someone had started boiling pasta. Dry noodles floating in hot water, just beginning to soften. The propane knob was turned to medium. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. We hadn't touched the stove since dinner. The food was new. The pot was one we hadn't even used yet, and the water had just started boiling. This had been turned on recently, within the last 5 minutes. I turned it off, heart pounding. Then I saw the footprints. The floor near the back door was smeared with mud. Big prints, clear treads from work boots. The table I'd used to block the door had been pushed just slightly aside. Not knocked over, moved. Deliberately, quietly. My skin crawled. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I rushed to check the bedroom. She was still asleep. I shut the door gently, came back, and double-checked the whole cabin. Front door locked. Windows closed. Back door broken lock. Slightly ajar. I shut it again, moved the table back, and this time shoved the mini fridge in front of it too. Then I sat there for the rest of the night with the axe across my lap. In the morning, she knew something was wrong. I showed her the boot prints and the stove. She thought I was playing a prank at first, until she saw the pot and the fresh mud. The prints were all over the floor. Muddy soles leading from the back door to the stove and then vanishing. Nothing else was missing. No gear, no bags, nothing. But someone had been inside while we were sleeping, cooking food. They hadn't touched anything else. Not money, not clothes. Just used the cabin like it was theirs. I called the number on the rental listing. No answer. Just a voicemail that didn't even mention the cabin. Just a name and a tone. We packed fast. Left the dishes unwashed. Food unopened. I didn't care. I left the axe on the porch. We drove out without looking back. A few days later, I finally heard back from the host. He apologized. Said he hadn't been to the cabin in over 6 months. He lived out of state. Claimed he had no idea the shed was open or the back lock was broken. Sounded surprised when I told him what happened. But what stuck with me, what I still think about now, is what he said at the end of the message. "I don't usually rent it out this time of year," he said. "Honestly, I didn't even think anyone would book it this weekend. You're the first in a long time. I think whoever was staying there had been using the cabin while it sat empty. Maybe for weeks. They had food. They knew the stove. They had a routine. And when we showed up, we interrupted it. They didn't try to hurt us. They didn't even confront us. But they came back. They walked inside while we were asleep and used the kitchen like we didn't matter. Like they belonged there more than we did. Maybe they were planning to wait us out. Maybe they thought we'd leave and they could keep going. Maybe they were squatting in the woods or living in the shed. Whatever it was, we were never supposed to be there, and they knew it. I rented the cabin because I wanted to disconnect. It had been over a year since I'd taken time off work. I had burned myself out without realizing it. Always answering emails, staying late, skipping meals. I started feeling like I was just floating through each week. I didn't even feel tired anymore, just flat. I needed silence. I needed to stop looking at screens. So I took a week off. Didn't tell many people. Just packed up and left town. I found a listing for a cabin out in the woods, 2 hours from the nearest city. No internet, no cable, no neighbors. Just me, my car, some food, and the quiet. It was February. Cold, but not dangerous. The forecast said there might be light snow, but nothing heavy. That was fine. I wanted that peaceful stillness that only winter seems to bring. The drive took me through back roads and up a narrow mountain pass. I didn't see another car the last 45 minutes of the drive. Just forest on both sides of the road. Bare trees, patches of snow, cold wind. Eventually, the GPS took me down a dirt path that looked more like a trail. It was only wide enough for one vehicle and curved through tall pines. After 10 minutes, I reached a clearing. The cabin sat in the middle of it. It was small. 1 story, wood-planked exterior, a narrow porch out front with 3 steps, a chimney on the left side. There was a woodshed a few feet away and a small outhouse even farther back. The door had a keypad lock. The owners had sent me the code the day before. I parked, unloaded my food and bag, and stepped inside. It was warmer than I expected. The cabin had a propane heater that had been running on low. There was also a wood stove in the corner for extra heat if I wanted it. Inside, it was clean but plain. A bed, a table, a couple of chairs, a kitchenette with a gas stove and a few cupboards, and 2 small windows on each side of the room. Everything I needed. The quiet was the best part. I couldn't hear anything. No cars. No hum of electronics. Just the occasional creak of the cabin as it settled in the cold. I unpacked, lit a fire, made some food, and spent the evening reading. No phone, no laptop, just a paperback and the sound of the wind outside. That first night, I slept well. The knocking started the second night. I had gone to bed around midnight. The propane heater was on low, and I had a heavy blanket. I remember falling asleep fast, the kind of sleep you only get after a full day of quiet. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, not startled, just awake. I didn't open my eyes at first. I just lay there, wondering why I was awake. I didn't hear anything at first. The fire in the stove had gone out. The room was very quiet. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks. Soft, not pounding, just slow and deliberate. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard anything. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm. The knocks were coming from the front door. I didn't move. I just lay there. My body was completely still, but my heart was pounding. It was 2:41 a.m. I didn't hear any footsteps. No voice. No movement. Just silence. Eventually, I sat up in bed, very slowly. I didn't turn on any lights. I reached for the flashlight on the table beside the bed and held it in my lap. For a while, nothing happened. After maybe 10 minutes, I quietly stood and walked to the window next to the door. I pulled the curtain just a sliver. There was nothing outside. No movement. No footprints in the snow I could see from the porch light. The front steps looked undisturbed. I stood there for a long time. Eventually, I went back to bed. I didn't fall asleep for hours. The next morning, I walked around the cabin. There was a light dusting of snow on the ground, the kind that would clearly show if someone had walked through it. But there were no prints near the porch, no tire tracks, nothing. That bothered me more than if I had seen prints. I told myself it must have been something else. A tree branch brushing the cabin, the wood contracting in the cold. Even animals can make weird sounds. I spent the day hiking the nearby trail. I wanted to shake off the weird feeling. It worked for a little while. The cold air was clean. I saw deer tracks and the outline of a fox's trail crossing mine. It was peaceful again. That night, I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep as deeply. I kept waking up and checking the time. At 2:36 a.m., I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, I was already half awake. I sat up and froze. The sound came from the same place, the front door. Again, no footsteps, no voice, just 3 soft knocks. I waited, not moving. After 10 minutes, I quietly stood and walked to the front window. I pulled the curtain an inch. Nothing. The porch was empty. The wind had stopped. The trees weren't moving. There was no sound. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The third day, I made a decision. I had brought a small trail camera. I usually used it when hiking just to catch wildlife at night. It was battery-powered and recorded to a micro SD card. I mounted it inside the cabin, aimed through the small glass window above the front door. That night, I went to bed with the flashlight beside me again. I left the camera recording. I didn't want to hear the knocking again, but I needed to know if something was really out there. At 2:42 a.m., I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Same sound, same time, same rhythm. But this time, I didn't move. I didn't even look out the window. I just stared at the ceiling. I didn't want to see it with my eyes. I wanted to see what the camera saw. Eventually, the silence returned. I stayed awake until dawn. I checked the footage as soon as the sun came up. The file was there. The camera had been triggered at 2:41 a.m. The video showed the porch clearly. First, there was nothing, just the empty steps and the trees beyond. Then, a figure stepped into view. A man. He wore a dark jacket, gloves, and a ski mask that covered most of his face. He walked calmly up the steps, stood in front of the door, and raised his hand. Tap, tap, tap. Then he stood still. He didn't move for nearly a minute, just stared at the door. Then he slowly turned and walked off the porch, disappearing to the left. The camera caught him again, peeking in the side window, then again at the back. He was circling the cabin, looking in every window. Then he disappeared. The clip ended. I packed everything as fast as I could. I shoved my clothes into the bag, threw the food into the cooler, and locked both doors behind me. When I pulled onto the dirt road, I noticed something I hadn't before. About 50 yards from the cabin, a narrow trail led off into the woods. It wasn't a marked path, just tire tracks, half covered by snow. I got out of the car and followed the tracks on foot. Maybe 30 or 40 feet in, I saw it. A white van, parked behind the trees. No windows in the back, no plates. It had been sitting there for a while. The snow around it was packed down from footsteps. I didn't go near it. I turned around and walked straight back to my car. I drove until I had signal again and called the police. They met me at a ranger station later that morning. I showed them the footage. Officers went out to the cabin with a search team. They found the van just like I said. Inside were food wrappers, blankets, water bottles, and clothing. Someone had been living in that van. They didn't find the man. They said it looked like he left sometime between my last night and that morning. They found tracks heading deeper into the woods, but they faded fast. No one else was found. I never went back to that cabin. The owners refunded my money and took the listing offline. They said they had no idea someone was living nearby. I believed them, but I also believed that man had done this before. He waited until after 2 a.m. every night, knocked 3 times, stood there, watched, then walked the perimeter. No sound, no attempt to get in, just watched. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed longer. I'm just glad I left when I did. Now, even in my own apartment, I wake up sometimes at 2:30 in the morning, and I listen for 3 soft knocks. I still think about that weekend. I still hear the sound, sharp and human, screaming from the trees. It was the most terrifying noise I've ever heard in my life. And even now, years later, I hear it again in my dreams. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip. Just me and my friend Kevin. We had rented a small hunting cabin deep in the mountains of Vermont. Kevin's uncle used to stay there during hunting season, but he hadn't been up in years. It was off-grid, no Wi-Fi, no electricity. Just a wood-burning stove, a couple of cots, an outhouse, and a roof. The kind of place people rent when they want to unplug. The kind of place people don't ask questions about. We packed light, a cooler with some frozen meat, a few canned meals, snacks, whiskey, firewood. It was only a 2-night trip, just to get away from city noise. I brought a cheap flashlight, a knife, and a waterproof jacket. Kevin brought a heavier flashlight, a small hatchet, and a solar charger for his phone, though he didn't expect signal. We arrived late afternoon on Friday. The drive took almost 4 hours, most of it on regular roads, until we turned off onto a winding gravel path that led up through thick pine forest. The GPS lost signal halfway up, but Kevin had marked the cabin on his offline map. There were no other cabins or homes nearby, just miles of forest on all sides. The cabin was small and simple. Old wood, a little leaning, but it felt sturdy. A single room with a stove in the middle, 2 cots against opposite walls, and a locked shed about 20 feet out back. We didn't bother opening the shed. No need. It was quiet. I mean, dead quiet. No traffic, no people. Just trees moving in the wind. It felt like we were the only humans for miles, and I think we probably were. The first day was normal. We built a fire inside, warmed up some food, drank whiskey, and sat on the porch until the sun disappeared. We had headlamps, but once it was dark, the woods swallowed everything. Beyond the porch, it was just black. At around 11 p.m., we called it a night. I lay down on my cot, fully clothed except for my boots, and listened to the wind outside. It was a light breeze, nothing crazy. The trees creaked every now and then. Somewhere far away, I thought I heard a branch snap. I brushed it off. Animals, maybe. The cabin was built up on short stilt beams, just enough to keep it off the wet ground. We were used to strange noises from staying in other rural spots. It didn't feel out of place. The first night passed without issue. The second night was not the same. That Saturday, we spent the day hiking down the ridge behind the cabin. We found a shallow creek and sat beside it for a while. No signs of people, no trash, no trails, no old fire pits. That was part of the appeal. It really felt untouched. We made it back to the cabin around 5 p.m. and started cooking. Canned beef stew and instant mashed potatoes. We ate by lantern light, drank more whiskey, and watched the woods fade into darkness again. Around 9:30 p.m., we heard something, a scream. At first, I didn't believe it. Came from far off, north of the cabin, I think. High-pitched, drawn-out, human. Definitely a woman's voice. It sounded like someone screaming the word, "Help," but it was too far to make out the exact words. Just the tone of it. Pain. Panic. Kevin and I both froze. We looked at each other and waited. Then it came again. Same direction. Still far, but closer than before. I stepped off the porch with my flashlight, aiming it toward the tree-line. Nothing. Just empty woods. Another scream. Closer. We both stared at the forest for a long time. Then Kevin said something that stuck with me. Why would someone be out here at night, screaming for help? We hadn't seen a single person since we arrived. No parked cars, no hikers, no fresh tracks. The area was remote. No one just happened to be wandering by. Still, it sounded like someone needed help. I walked to the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 yards from the cabin, and scanned the woods. Another scream. This time it sounded different, less desperate, more drawn out, less real. I took a few steps back. Kevin had turned off his flashlight. He was standing there in the dark, listening carefully. We waited, then silence. No more screaming, just cold wind and creaking trees. We stood outside for almost 20 minutes after that. Nothing came out. No more sounds. No signs of anyone. Eventually, we went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the dark for a long time. That night, I slept with my boots on and my flashlight in my hand. The next morning, I hiked to a ridge to try to get a cell signal. I finally got a single bar of LTE, just enough to load some basic pages. Out of curiosity, I checked the local news. There it was. A missing hiker alert posted the day before. A young woman, blonde hair, early 30s, solo hiking trip. Last seen entering the same national forest 2 days earlier. My stomach dropped. I screenshotted the alert and showed Kevin when I got back to the cabin. We were both shaken. That voice we heard, it could have been her, or someone trying to sound like her. We decided to leave a day early. There was no reason to stay. We packed everything up, made sure the fire was out, and locked up the cabin. We didn't talk much on the drive home. 2 days later, the story got worse. A news site posted an update. The missing woman hadn't been found. But now, search teams were linking her case to 2 others. All of them had gone missing in the same general area over the last few months. All of them were solo hikers or campers. None of them had been found. Buried in the article was a chilling paragraph. It mentioned that in 2 of the cases, witnesses staying in nearby cabins had reported hearing distress screams in the woods. But when they investigated, they found no one. Authorities had started to suspect the screams weren't real. Someone, possibly more than one person, was luring people out of their shelters in the middle of the night using fake cries for help. The idea hit me like a punch. That night when we stood outside with flashlights, waiting for a woman to emerge from the woods. What if we'd gone deeper? What if we'd walked out into the trees? What if we'd split up trying to find the source? We didn't, and we lived, but others did, and they didn't come back. It's been years since that weekend. I've never returned to that cabin. Kevin sold his gear not long after. Neither of us camps anymore. We don't talk about that night often, but I still think about it. The scream didn't sound fake. That's what still messes with me. It sounded real, not like a recording, not like a prank. It sounded like a woman terrified for her life. But maybe that's the point. Whoever did it, whoever does it, knows how to make it sound real. They probably study it, practice. Wait, they probably watch the cabins. Maybe from the trees, maybe from higher up, waiting for the perfect moment to draw someone out. We were almost next. I don't know how close we came. I don't know if someone was watching us that night. I don't know if they were hiding behind a tree, crouched in the dark, holding something sharp. I only know that the scream came from the woods, and that we stayed put. That might have saved our lives.